Do you see guys and girls in the new generations writing poems to each other, for example? I honestly don't see it. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that emotions are gradually fading away. But we think we've finally become free. Then we look back. Nope, not this time either. I mean, we still haven't become free. Then we start to say, oh, this was also a kind of guidance. This was a guided freedom too. And then there are topics that remain in the more private areas of the body. This includes things like virginity, abortion, relationships with the opposite sex, or physical contact with the opposite sex, and so on. In these areas, it seems like traditional religious forms are still pretty well preserved, but secularization also seems to have opened quite a few doors. I had formulated it like this: religion entrusts the woman to the man, and the man entrusts religion to the woman. What I mean by that, here's what I mean.
Hello to everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, today we will be talking about secularization and body politics. Our guest is Dr. Harun Tunç. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor, we did a program with you before. We talked about secularization and its relationship with gender. Today, we want to discuss secularization a bit more in terms of body politics, again in connection with your field of study. So we're talking about the concept of modernization. There's a transition from being traditional to being modern. In this context, what kind of change or transformation do you see in the perception of the body?
Well, in the traditional period, the body was under the orbit of religion. Religion had its own desires and demands regarding the body. Through symbols and certain rituals, it was expected that this would be visible on the body. Mostly, the soul was seen as something exalted, while the body was perceived, so to speak, as something that needed to be disciplined. In a way, the body was imprisoned by the soul. With the modern era, the body became more prominent, more of a subject in its own right. Let's say it was brought to that point. Here, of course, in the traditional era, the body was mostly seen as something entrusted by God. And this trust was thought of as something that needed to be returned to its owner safe and sound. For example, our elders, the older generations, when asked how they are or what they're up to, would often say, "I'm just carrying around the trust." What they actually mean here is the body. So, I'm just carrying around the trust. And when the time comes, I'll return it, and they didn't really think it was right to make too many decisions or changes regarding it. But with the modern era, the idea and approach of my body, my decisions started to be expressed much more often. And here, it's thought that any kind of decision or modification can be made regarding the body. Frankly, the body started to be presented as something more prominent, more of a subject compared to the soul. This time, it's as if the soul has become trapped in the body. And ultimately, yes, the body is making itself seen. It says, "I am here, I exist," with all its brilliance, with everything it consumes. But honestly, a new problem is starting to emerge here. The body is gradually starting to become more mechanical. So what we're starting to see is a body stripped of emotions. It's becoming more and more aestheticized, shinier, but also increasingly devoid of feelings. From a traditional perspective, the female body is viewed as a plus or minus. The male body is seen neutrally. This used to put women at a disadvantage. But what I'm talking about now is different. In the modern era, when we look at both genders, the body is displayed in all its brilliance, in all its nakedness. But this time, what emerges is a body stripped of emotions.
So this is a kind of objectification.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Frankly, it's like there's this problem of turning from object to subject, and then back from subject to object again. I can put it that way. For example, do you see young men and women in the new generation writing poems to each other? To be honest, I can't see it. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that emotions are gradually fading away. But interestingly, both men and women can now present themselves in a more striking, more aesthetic way with their bodies.
That reminded me of something, Professor. One of your professors mentioned this, actually. It was a female professor who talked about this. And she actually said that when we were in the Faculty of Theology, none of us showed any part of ourselves. We wore long overcoats, long headscarves, but she said that even the flutter of those headscarves would inspire poetry. That just reminded me of this. So actually, with secularization during the transition from traditional to modern, the visibility of the body increased. But as you said, there was also a transformation in the way feelings were expressed and in emotions themselves.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, we were poor, we found something, and then we became deprived again. We're faced with a situation like this.
That was a great way to put it, Professor. So, how have the mechanisms of control over the body changed with secularization today? For example, if we take the female body again as an example, the female body has become more visible. So, should this be seen as a form of freedom for women, or can we also understand it as a new kind of social pressure?
Honestly, the body is, well, let's say it's completely under siege. We perceive this more in women as if, quote unquote, it stands out more. Actually, this exists for men too. Is present in the male body as well. What I mean is, his body is also under siege. This is related to what we mentioned earlier about shifting from being an object to a subject, or from a subject to an object. Today, the female body is consumed by the patriarchal, capitalist, and consumerist system. But on the other hand, the female body is also being depleted, to be honest. I mean, today you constantly, in a sense, put women on display with their bodies. In the advertising and marketing industries, for example, women are still struggling with things like high heels. I mean, I don't know, am I exaggerating a bit too much? When I look at it, I see that women really endure a lot just to be present in professional and public life in those high heels. That's what I'm trying to say.
It's tough, Professor.
Yes. And there are other issues as well. And constantly, this consumerist capitalist system keeps telling women to consume. It says, you exist as long as you consume. It's almost like we've moved from, I think, therefore I am, to I consume, therefore I am. But as I said, we shouldn't overlook something here. It's not just women who consume. Only women undergo aesthetic surgery. We shouldn't perceive it as if only women's bodies are on display. It's just that women are ahead of men in this. Men consume too. Men's bodies are also being aestheticized.
Men are following along too.
They're following along, honestly. So, there's really no need to focus both eyes only on women. Honestly, one eye should be on women and the other on men.
And here, there's also the concept of the ideal body image. It's an ideal body image that we see emerging with secularization, one that's presented by the media and made visible on social media. So how is this being produced? Here, how should we view the way the ideal body image is being presented?
For example, let's take a look at the profile of a beautiful woman or a handsome man. Whether it's on social media or on various platforms, it doesn't matter. The standards are changing so quickly, the criteria are shifting so fast that it's really hard to keep up anymore. So, I mean, fashion, both the male body and the female body, are somehow in various ways under the influence of fashion, capitalism, and so on. So with this beauty myth, or let's say the myth of being handsome, such a relationship forms with the body that the rules and standards are constantly changing. and evolving very rapidly. And both men and women feel like they always have to adapt to this. And honestly, it gets pretty exhausting. I mean, this is something we need to recognize. There's also, honestly, a wind blowing in from the West. Europe, the West. And then there's also a wind coming from Korea, what we call K-pop culture. I mean, let's just take a look around us. It's like the new generations have been covered in whitewash. Having pale skin has almost become a standard, a kind of benchmark. For example, look at the glasses women or men are wearing. Suddenly, all the glasses became oval-shaped. I mean, there used to be square glasses too. But seriously, I'm telling you, I don't think this sudden shift to all oval glasses is just a coincidence or something natural. Through social media and so on, somehow, the K-pop culture, the Western influence, and so forth constantly bring about new standards. And honestly, they create new styles, new trends, they really do. This is starting to take on a certain form. I mean, if I put it in terms inspired by Foucault's analyses of knowledge, subject, and power, we think we've finally become free. Then we look back. Nope, not this time either. So we still haven't achieved freedom. We start to say, oh, this was also a kind of manipulation. This was a guided freedom too. Honestly, I can say that we're under siege like this.
Actually, there's a multidimensional siege going on here. When we think about secularization in Turkey, we see these changes in many aspects, makeup, aesthetics, and so on. So, how should we evaluate these in the context of secularization? When we look at all these concepts, how should we interpret the changes and transformations related to the body?
Now here, I proceed by distinguishing between the surface of the body and its more intimate parts. On the surface of the body, both in women and in men, there is a significant and rapid change. Through what means? Through cosmetics, through aesthetics, through practices at hair salons, through changes in clothing, and so on. So in both genders, there can be rapid change. It's just that sometimes women seem to be 2 steps ahead, to be honest. But I can say that for both genders, the change is progressing at almost the same level. In the forms that remain on the surface of the body, clothing, colors, aesthetics, hair salon practices. Here, the difference between genders seems to have narrowed quite a bit. In other words, unisex lifestyles seem to be on the rise. The difference between men's and women's clothing and the difference in their colors seems to have decreased quite a bit. Of course, from a religious perspective, this doesn't seem to be something that would be welcomed. Honestly, what we see here is a faster pace of secularization. Well, of course, there is something like this too. Again, here we need to keep this in mind. Clothing, makeup, accessories, aesthetics, hair salon practices. We shouldn't just focus on women when it comes to these things. Honestly, there have also been significant changes in men's practices. For example, if you compare men's hair salons to women's hair salons today, honestly, men aren't lagging behind women at all. Pretty much every kind of application and practice exists. I mean, when we look at the things people do for beauty or attractiveness, that's what I mean. But as I said, in these more superficial areas, it seems like gender differences are fading away more quickly. It looks like these roles and identities are becoming more and more leveled out. And then there are topics that remain in the more private areas of the body. This includes things like virginity, abortion, relationships with the opposite sex, or physical contact with the opposite sex, and so on. In these areas, traditional religious forms still seem to hold on quite a bit, but it also looks like secularization has opened a lot of doors. Honestly, this is where the real issues start to arise. Why? Because masculinity creates quite a hypocritical culture around these issues. I have to say this. Why? Because it wants to entrust privacy, religion, religiosity, morality, everything to women. It wants the responsibility to stay with them. That's why I once formulated it as religion entrusts women to men, but men entrust religion to women. What I mean by this, for example, the Prophet's call to entrust women to men is actually an innocent gesture. In other words, protect them. We granted some rights, we introduced some rights. Protect these rights. But when we look at modern thought or lifestyle, men are more often associated with secularism. In fact, being secular is perceived as if it's natural, as if it's inherently secular. The idea is that women should remain religious, that religion should be entrusted to them, and so religion is entrusted to women. So it leads to the idea that she is the one who must be honorable, she is the one who must be virtuous, she is the one who will protect religion, she is the one who will represent morality. Frankly, we men should include ourselves in this as well, at least so that there is no problem. We're creating a somewhat hypocritical culture here. That's just how it is. And in many ways, women are constantly being kept under surveillance. I mean, for example, you've probably heard this phrase a lot. A man, for instance, will say this to his wife. He'll say, "I trust you, but I don't trust the people outside." What is that? Basically, it means you need to protect your boundaries. But what about you? I mean, if you ask the man, since it's already seen as natural or secular for him,
It seems like he doesn't need anything like that.
yeah, he doesn't need that.
Maybe we should also look at this in the context of religion and see it in connection with the headscarf as a symbol imposed on women. Because, as you said, men entrusted religion to women, and since the headscarf especially represents religion, it placed a burden on women. So it can be interpreted like this. Wherever a woman goes, she represents her religion with her headscarf, she displays it, and she carries a huge responsibility because of that. But on the other hand, when we look at men, even religious men, there's actually a perception that they don't have this kind of responsibility or obligation, that there isn't such a symbol for them.
Yes. In fact, let me say something by looking at it from the opposite perspective. For example, when we look at it from the perspective of religiously conservative circles, well, today, headscarved women, religious women, have a much higher zest for life and ability to hold on to life than men do. And I'm saying this despite all the oppression and all the negativity that has been going on since February 28th. So despite all this, their life energy is high. They are accomplishing great things in the fields of science, culture, art, philosophy, and thought. They are interested and have started to make appearances in almost all sports and music branches. Instead of men paving the way a bit here, offering some supportive words or taking supportive actions for them, they often end up fussing over the colors and styles of their headscarves. Or, for example, sometimes even their visibility and presence in public life becomes bothersome or problematic to others. But I have to say this, right now, for example, there is a karate athlete named Kubra Dagli. The mark this girl has left in the public sphere, on screens, on platforms, with her headscarf. Why am I saying this? I don't mean to say this as if our girl is necessarily religious or conservative. If we think about the impact she's made in religious conservative circles, in the context of what you write and talk about, how many men, how many male teachers can actually leave the kind of mark that she has? I'm really curious about this. That's what I'm talking about a bit. Honestly, we need to take our eyes and hands off the heads-carved woman a little. If things open up even more, I'm saying this in terms of the representation of religion. I'm not talking about religiosity. And why is that? Because in the postmodern era, what's being said is that religiosity, a deeper religiosity, is fading while religiousness is on the rise. It's said that now religiosity and secularism are being expressed just at the level of symbols. And the headscarf is exactly that. Heads-carved women are representing it beautifully. They're representing it in their own way. In this sense, I think it would be good to step back a bit from this sarcastic, controlling, and oppressive discourse and practices toward religious women who wear the headscarf.
That was a really beautiful message, Professor. One of the things that caught my attention in your book is actually the transformations in everyday practices related to bodily contact, which you just mentioned, and how we see secularization in this context. You also talked about the hypocritical attitudes of men in this regard. You have examples of this. Very nice. For example, as part of your field research, you present different examples of how religious people view handshakes and hugging, and how secular people view these behaviors. If we were to elaborate on this a bit more, how do you see it, Professor? For example, in this context, how does the perspective change regarding a woman shaking hands with a man? And how does the perception differ when a man initiates the handshake? How does this take shape?
Let me put it this way, not just handshaking, but generally when we look at women and the body, women and men and the body, in other words, perceptions of the body related to gender, honestly, I don't really see significant differences between modern secular groups and religious conservative groups. When it comes to women, especially regarding the female body, almost all ideologies and viewpoints end up agreeing with each other. That's how I would put it. Honestly, that's the situation. Of course, when it comes to more specific topics, different things might come up, like handshaking, hugging, and so on. But of course, when we look at it from a religiously conservative perspective, for example, handshaking has almost stopped being an issue in modern lifestyles. But for example, face-to-face handshaking or hugging while shaking hands, I'm talking about with the opposite sex, that still maintains its sensitivity, so I formulated it like this. I formulated the dynamic as our hands and our private face. So yeah, there are things like this. There are these in-between forms, things that haven't really started to change yet, things that are still the same.
It still seems to be in a phase of transformation. In other words, there's a gradual process of change and transformation. Yes. So, Professor, do you think that with secularization, gender is also being reproduced in society? How do you see this?
It is definitely the case. Of course, it's the case. I mean, has modernity and secularism completely flattened out gender roles? Or is there still a process of reproduction going on? Of course there is. For example, we see this in education, in politics, in various areas of public life, in family life, basically in many places. But if I focus more on the body, considering our topic and the boundaries we're working within, when we look at it from the perspective of the body, there is a process of change and transformation. But that patriarchal social structure also acts as a barrier to this change and transformation. To be honest, it wants to stand as a wall in front of it. What does this look like, for example? A man's small earring. Men are wearing earrings now. This has been overcome in many places in Turkey. It's no longer an issue. But now we ask women, like your partner, your husband, your son, and so on. So, how would you react if he wore an earring? Now, women or men say, okay, he can wear an earring, but it can't be a hoop, it can't have stones, and it can't be gold. It has to be silver or steel, e.g.
So there are criteria.
So what are they trying to say to the man here? Hoop, gold, shiny, or jeweled ones are considered feminine women's earrings. And for men, it should be made of steel or silver, and as small as a chickpea. So in that sense, they're actually still trying to maintain that gender distinction. They want it to stay that way. Or for example, there's a kind of flattening in clothing. There's a flattening in colors. Women now wear the color blue. Let me put it that way. You know how there's that whole thing about pink for girls and blue for boys? Well, women are saying, blue works for us in every way. But when it comes to men, people still say it's okay if they don't wear pink. So that's kind of how it is. Even with colors, things only flatten out to a certain point. Then there's a line that's drawn, honestly. By society, or, well, in our discourse and practices, I should say. There are other topics too. For example, as long as skirts are considered for women, it seems like gender differences will keep being reproduced, clothing and so on. Let's put it that way. Because unisex clothes and unisex lifestyles are becoming more common for both men and women. But as long as skirts are seen as women's clothing, that difference will continue. Men will keep their distance from that. What I mean is, gender can be reproduced in other aspects of the body as well.
The examples made it much clearer, Professor. Thank you so much for your valuable comments and contributions.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, today we talked about secularization and body politics. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.